Hello, and welcome back to Story Time with Eric Zimmer. Where we last left off in Where the Red Fern Grows, we were up to the part of the night when Billy and his dogs were hunting to see who would enter the finals. I hope they catch that last coon. Are you ready? Alright, let's begin. Chapter 17. Looking up in the sky, Papa said, "That doesn't look good up there. I think we are in for a storm." The sky had turned a dark gray. Fast-moving clouds were rolling through the heavens. Grandpa said, "Looks like we're going to get some wind, too." Scared and thinking everyone might want to stop hunting because of a few clouds, I said, "If a storm is brewing, it's a good night to hunt. All game stirs just before a storm." 30 minutes later, Papa said, "Listen." We stood still. A low moaning sound could be heard in the top of the tall sycamores. Grandpa said, "I was afraid of that. We're going to get some wind." We heard a rattling in the leaves and the underbrush. It was beginning to sleet. The air turned cold and chilly. From far downriver, we heard the deep baying of a hound on a trail. It was old Dan. Seconds later, the rhythmic crying of a little lamb could be heard. Swallowing the lump that had jumped up in my throat, I whooped as loud as I could. The ground was turning white with sleet. The storm had really set in. We hurried along. I said to Papa, "If this keeps up, that old coon won't run long. He'll head for his den." "If it gets much worse," Papa said, "I know some coon hunters that won't be running very long. They'll be frozen too stiff to run." The judge asked if there was any danger of getting lost. "I don't know," Papa said. "It's all strange country to me." My dogs' voices sounded far away. I knew they were much closer than they sounded as they were downwind from us. Finding 3 large sycamores growing close together, we stopped on the leeward side. Papa shouted above the wind, "I don't know if we can take much more of this." "It is bad," Grandpa replied. "It looks like it's going to get worse." "You can't see over 15 feet now," the judge said. "Do you think we can find the buggy?" "I think we can find the buggy, all right," Papa said. I could no longer hear the voices of my dogs. This had me worried. I didn't want to leave them out in the storm. "Can anyone hear the hounds?" Grandpa asked. "I can't," Papa said. The judge spoke up. "Fellas, I think we better go in," he said. "There's no telling where they are. They may have crossed the river." Scared and knowing I had to do something, I said, "They're closer than you think, probably treed by now. You can't hear them for this wind." I begged, "Let's go a little further." There was no reply, and no one made a move to leave the shelter of the trees. Taking a few steps, I said, "I'll take the lead, just follow me." "Billy, we couldn't find them," Papa said. "You can't see or hear a thing. We had better start back to camp." "I think so too," the judge said. At this remark, I cried, "I've been out in storms like this before, all by myself. I've never left my dogs in the woods, and I'm not going to now, even if I have to look for them by myself." No one answered. "Please go just a little further," I begged. "I just know we'll hear them." Still no one spoke or made a move to go on. Stepping over to my father, I buried my face in his old Mackinaw coat. Sobbing, I pleaded with him not to turn back. He patted my head. "Billy," he said, "a man could freeze to death in this storm, and besides, your dogs will give up and come in." "That's what has me worried," I cried. "They won't come in." "They won't, Papa. Little Lamb might, but not old Dan. He'd die before he'd leave a coon in a tree." Papa was undecided. Making up his mind, he stepped away from the tree and said to the others, "I'm going on with him. You fellows coming or going back?" He turned and followed me. Grandpa and the judge fell in behind him. By this time, the ground was covered with a thin white layer of sleet. We kept slipping and falling. I could hear Grandpa mumbling and grumbling. The wind-driven sleet stung our skin like thousands of prickling needles. Ugh. Strong gusts of wind growled and moaned through the tops of the tall timber. Once during a momentary lull of the storm, I thought I heard the baying of a hound. I told my father I thought I had heard old Dan. From which direction? He asked. From that way, I said, pointing to our left. We started on. A few minutes later, Papa stopped. He shouted to my grandfather, Did you hear anything? No, Grandpa shouted back. I can't hear anything in this storm. I thought I did, but I'm not sure, the judge said. Over. Where was it coming from? Papa asked. Over that way, the judge said, pointing to our right. That's the way it sounded to me, Papa said. At that moment, all of us heard the deep voice of old Dan. It sounds as if they're close, Grandpa said. Let's split up, said the judge. Maybe one of us can find them. No, Papa said, it'd be easy to get lost in this storm. I think they're more to the right to us, I said. I do too, Papa said. We trudged on. Old Dan bawled again. The sound of his voice seemed to be all around us. The way the wind is whipping the sound through this timber, the judge said, we'd be lucky if we ever found them. Papa shouted over the roar of the wind. We can't take much more of this. We'll freeze to death. The men were giving up. I felt the knot again as it crawled up in my throat. Salt water froze on my eyelashes. Kneeling down, I put my ear close to the icy ground in hopes I could hear my dogs. But I couldn't hear anything except the roar of the blizzard. Standing up, I peered this way and that. All I could see was the white wall of whirling sleet. I closed my eyes and sat at a silent prayer and hoped for a miracle. We heard a sharp crack and a loud crashing noise. A large limb torn from a tree by the strong wind fell to the ground. The sharp crack to the limb gave me the idea. Shouting to my father, I said, Shoot the gun! My dogs are close enough to hear it. Maybe little Ann will come to us. Papa didn't hesitate. Pointing the gun high over his head, he pulled the trigger. The sharp crack rang out into the teeth of the storm. We waited. Just when I had given up all hope and sunk to the lowest depth of despair, out of the white wall of driving sleet, my little dog came to me. I knelt down and gathered her in my arms. Taking one of the lead ropes from my pocket, I tied it to her collar. I said, Find him, little girl. Please find old Dan. Right then, I didn't care about coons, gold cups, or anything. All I wanted was my dogs. I don't know how she did it. Straight into the face of the storm she led us. Time after time she would stop and turn her head this way and that. I knew she couldn't scent or see anything. Instinct alone was guiding her. Over a winding and twisting trail we followed. Coming out of the bottom, she led us into a thick canebrake. The tall stalks sheltered us from the storm. The roaring of the wind didn't seem as loud. Like ghostly figures, large trees loomed out of the almost solid mass. Falling and stumbling, we kept pushing on. Grandpa shouted, Hold up a minute, I'm just about all in. We stopped. You think that hound knows what she's doing? The judge asked. Maybe we're just running around in circles. Looking at me, Papa said, I hope she does. Some of these cane breaks cover miles. If we get lost in here, we'll be in bad shape. Grandpa said, I think we've gone too far. The last time I heard old Dan, he sounded quite close. That was because the wind carried the sound, I said. The judge spoke up. Fellas, no dog is worth the lives of 3 men. Now let's do the smart thing and get out of here while we can. Our clothes are wet. If we keep on wandering around in this jungle, we'll freeze to death. It doesn't look like the blizzard is ever going to let up. I could hear the roar of the blizzard back in the thick timber of the bottoms. 2 large limbs being rubbed together by the strong wind made a grinding, creaking sound. The tall, slender cane around us rattled and swayed. I could feel the silence closing in. I knew the judge's cold logic had had its effect on my father and grandfather. The men had given up. There was no hope left for me. Uh-oh. Kneeling down, I put my arms around little Ann. I felt the warm heat from her moist tongue caressing my ear. Closing my eyes, I said, Please, old Dan, bawl one more time, just one more time. I waited for my plea to be answered. With its loud roaring, the north wind seemed to be laughing at us. All around, tall stalks of cane were weaving and dancing to the rattling rhythm of their 3 knife-edged blades. My father tried to talk above the wind, but his words were lost in the storm. Just before another blast, clear as a foghorn on a stormy sea, old Dan's voice rang out loud and clear. It just seemed louder than the roar of the wind or the skeleton-like rustling of the tall, swaying cane. I jumped to my feet. My heart did a complete flip-flop. The knot in my throat felt as big as an apple. I tried to whoop, but it was no use. Little Ann bawled and tugged on the rope. There was no mistaking the direction. We knew that Little Ann had been right all along. Straight as an arrow, she led us to him. Old Dan was treed down in a deep gully. I slid off the bank and ran to him. His back was covered with a layer of frozen sleet. His frost-covered whiskers stood out straight as porcupine quills. I worked the wedges of ice from between his toes and scraped the sleet from his body with my hands. Little Ann came over and tried to wash his face. He didn't like it. Jerking loose from me, he ran over to the tree, reared up on it, and started bawling. Hearing shouting from the bank above me, I looked up. I could dimly see Papa and the judge through the driving sleet. At first I thought they were shouting to me, but on peering closer I could see they had their necks to me. Catching hold of some long stalks of cane that were hanging down from the steep bank, I pulled myself up. Papa shouted in my ear. They had their backs. Something has happened to your grandfather. Turning to the judge, he said, he was behind you. When was the last time you saw him? I don't know for sure, the judge said. I guess it was back where we heard the hound bawl. Didn't you hear anything? Papa asked. Hear anything? The judge exclaimed. How could I hear anything in all that noise? I thought he was behind me all the time, and I didn't miss him until we got here. I couldn't hold back the tears. My grandfather was lost and wandering in that white jungle of cane. Screaming for him, I started back. Papa caught me. He shouted, Don't do that! I tried to tear away from him, but his grip on my arm was firm. Shoot the gun, the judge said. Papa shot time after time. It was useless. We got no answer. Little Ann came up out of the washout. She stood and stared at me. Turning, she disappeared quickly in the thick cane. Minutes later we heard her. It was a long, mournful cry. The only times I had ever heard my little dog bawl like that was when she was baying at a bright Ozark moon, or when someone played a French harp or a fiddle close to her ear. She didn't stop until we reached her. Grandpa lay as he had fallen, face down in the icy sleet. His right foot was